I'll do a quick intro and then I'm going to pass it off to Lauren. My name is Michael Dunford. I'm with Catalyst Workplace Activation. I'm the strategic marketing manager. If you don't know about Catalyst, which I think everyone does, but we have been creating amazing and inspiring spaces for healthcare clients, government, corporate education as well for almost 40 years now. We're about to have our 40-year anniversary, which is crazy. I came to Catalyst because I am a healthcare design nerd. Wannabe though, right? It's not my practice, but I love it. And I knew that this company was very strong in it. I knew Herman Miller was as well, Miller Knoll. So I'm really excited to be a part of this team. And some context for what we're about to talk about today. So when we were brainstorming this, we had seen a bunch of webinars and speakers forums about this issue of nurse burnout, issues in healthcare, attraction and retention, the fact that 30% of nurses quit after their first year. But we wanted to try to cut through the doom and gloom a little bit and try to add some joy and delight and say, how could design be a solution here? We just scratched the surface. I don't know if we got there yet, but I think we're starting to have a really cool conversation. So thank you for joining us. Now I'll pass it off to Lauren.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren Cole. I'm the Strategic Account Executive for Healthcare in the Pacific Northwest for Miller Knoll. And I am lucky enough to get to work with Michael and Jeff and Karen and Amanda and all the great people here at Catalyst. And I'm especially lucky this week because I have gotten to hang out with one of my favorite people, Michelle Ossmann. She is the Director of Knowledge and Insight for Healthcare at Miller Knoll. She's also on my master's advisory committee, so she's a very, very close friend of mine. And so she's going to kick off our panel discussion this morning. She has some thoughts that she's going to share. And then we're also joined by a couple nurse executives. So we have Sunny Porter, Tina Seery from the Washington State Hospital Association. And then we have Ronn Goodnough as well, who's going to be up here hanging out. And Ron has promised to bring the doom and gloom and keep us real. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Michelle.
Yeah, we'll get off the stage. Thanks, y'all.
I believe I'm supposed to sit. This is where it's kind of funny, right? I don't think I've ever done a hybrid event. So thank you for your patience as we watch. I can see myself on the big camera. That is weird. All right. Let me share my screen. Excellent. All right. So we are going to briefly chat about 10 minutes nurse well-being, whether or not it's a table stake, whether or not it's something that we are achieving, and moving potentially to joy. Joy in clinical practice is certainly something that is familiar on the medical side. I don't know that we talk about it so much in terms of the joy that we can bring to nurses, and certainly whether or not the built environment has a part to play. So that's where we're gonna focus today. I do wish to say that this is not just about respite. You know, I often hear, we just need respite rooms. There are whole states where there are initiatives on creating gorgeous respite rooms. I love that. I've spent years in a closet trying to get some respite, but that does not truly, but that does not necessarily solve the problem. I struggle to imagine that 15 minutes in a beautiful room, no matter how lovely it is going to account for 12 hours of difficulty and struggle. That is the challenge here. So when I think about nurse joy and well-being, certainly respite's a part of it, but the other half of it, or 92% of it, is about improving clinical practice. So now let's just briefly talk about, we should have exposure to natural settings, get us out of the closet. Everyone should be out of the closet and into the light, right? We certainly would like that. And having that culture of respite and breaks. I'm fortunate enough to be releasing a paper shortly with Lisa LaRusso of Gresham Smith with University of Florida, looking at whether or not nurses actually take breaks. I invite you to take a look at that paper. Little teaser, it looks like they don't. And most nurses here in the room will attest to the fact that we don't. We have evidence here using sensor data. So again, the culture is important, and that's what the folks at University of Florida are now really engaging in, helping their nurses recognize that they want them to take breaks, encouraging breaks. It takes more than just the space. So today's focus, with our panelists, who I'm just super excited to hear from today, we're going to discuss clinician experience with built environment and design, what that really looks like, We're going to focus on the situational factors behind that nurse exodus, right? How do we make that better? Differentiate attractor characteristics for clinical staff versus administration. For example, I would argue that having a lovely space certainly might attract an office worker. For a clinician, it might be a little more than that. We want to be able to visualize our colleagues because we know that that confers safety, right? So there's a little bit more there, I would argue, for clinical staff. Elaborate on those environmental implications between joy and delight, and then share some best practices, feedback, and doom and gloom, so that we can certainly improve practice. So briefly, just to explore what the healthy workplace is, the WHO has clearly defined what they determine to be a healthy workplace across all sectors of the environment, whether it is your personal health resources, your psychosocial work environment. You'll notice they do call out the physical work environment. Now, it's interesting to know that the WHO isn't really talking about what we're talking about here. Whether or not you have ergonomic affordances, although a little bit. We're not talking about whether or not you have natural light. They're talking about safety. Are you going to be injured? But it seems that we do need to expand this notion of what a healthy physical work environment is to account for the sensorial experience of being a nurse, which is to say, they talk about it being a part of the workplace facility that can be detected. I would argue and affects our ability to use our senses, right? We have this incredible perceptual apparatus that allows us to deliver the best care that we possibly can. And so that is where that physical work environment makes a fundamental difference. If surveillance is a key part of my job and I can't see, hear, or find anybody, that's a part of my work environment that's making it difficult for me to do so. So the physical environment being important. And this is not a new idea. In 1857, Florence Nightingale talked about the 4 essentials of nursing heads and discipline. And you'll notice economy of attendance, ease of supervision, distribution in a convenient number, and the efficiency of the room. These are all built environment related. She doesn't talk about it that way, right? She talks about the experience, what it is that you need to do, what is that job to be done. But there are clearly environmental characteristics here. Even in Jonah and the advisory board published this piece in 2018, looking at what were those pieces that undermined nursing resilience. And they focused on those point of care safety threats. Certainly that's an issue that we can address here. But staffing pressures, emotional trauma, et cetera, these are built environment affected as well. If you look at what the Association for Critical Care Nurses, their top issue for nursing burnout is related to staffing. But again, staffing is also related to whether or not you can provide support, which is built environment mediated. So there is that workplace burden that we're just not addressing in clinical practice where we can insert joy. The physical environment sets the stage. This is a photograph from my doctoral work, a unit that I used to work on. And while it may not be beautiful, I love this unit. You know why? I had all the collegial support I needed. I could hear and see trait collar from across the room. I knew how it was going without having to exert extra work and effort. Right? So there is something about the built environment that sets that stage for us to be able to do our jobs. Now, is this as unattractive as all get up? Yes, it is. The clutter is certainly not ameliorating of stress, right? There are no windows in this unit. It's one of the old ones where the visitor area is actually on the exterior of the unit. And so the visitors get the windows, but the patients don't even, right? So we don't build this now. But units like this exist all over the country. We're not throwing out our stock of hospital supplies, right? So what can we do? So I would ask, what is a poor work environment for a nurse? And one that unreasonably burdens. And this is where, as designers, as folks who focus on interiors, because interiors is where we can really make a play, architecture is kind of set. It's really expensive to move. Interiors can make that play to explore how it is that we can affect that nursing burden. I will say there's no perfect design. There is that struggle. This is the cone of silence. I want this in the worst way. If any of you know who's developing this, I think you will make $1 gazillion because the ability to see and be seen and not be heard would be truly magical. But there is no perfect design, right? We have rooms at the end of corridors because we need beds, right? There is that reality. We're not going to be getting rid of some of these things. And so being creative about how it is that we can connect that nurse to her work, allow her to be connected or he connected to his patients and to his other colleagues. That is where we can make that difference, even within an imperfect design. And so I ask, is this design bringing joy? This is a photograph I took from patients ahead of bed, I went up to every patient room and put a camera in front of each patient's face, took a photograph and asked them, is this what you see? They would nod, yes or no. I would reframe the angle. And this is what they see: a linen cart, no one walking by, no observation of how and who they are. I will say, from the nurse's perspective, this is a scary room because no one is going to see you if you need help. And I've been in this room needing help. So I ask how it is that we can bring joy, just to remind everybody what joy is in clinical practice. Joy is having a meaningful relationship. This is as Bodenheimer defines it like this. He's really the guy who brought up the notion of the quadruple aim, right? And adding joy to that piece. Joy being able to have a meaningful relationship with your patients, with your colleagues, feel like you can deliver good care, meaningful care, make a difference. And so with that, I would love to hear from our panelists.
Yeah.
Please join us. I had to close out of this, or do I need to say? Sit first. Anybody know?
No, I think we can. I think we can look. Yeah, sure. Let's try it. Hello, panelists.
Well, good. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Hi. So good to see all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. So as we discussed in our earlier conversations and prepping, we are going to try to explore, what is the meaning between the clinician experience and the built environment? How is design affecting the clinician? Since you're the doom and gloom guy, I'll let you go first.
Why is that?
I don't know. That's what Michael declared you to be.
All right. Well, everybody, there's a lot of doom. So what's the relationship? Say it again.
The relationship between the clinical environment and design. We talked about the struggles that nurses have with environmental change, the new space being disruptive,
Oh, yeah.
the struggles with if there's a new space, then no one knows where that one thing is that everybody needs. So set that tone.
Well, I would agree with you that an environment that brings joy isn't necessarily beautiful. And I managed pediatric critical care for a number of years, and we transitioned from a small, cozy unit that was not very attractive to a big, beautiful unit. And that small unit, when you came in through the door in the morning, you could sense, you just had that sense of, okay, this area is hot, this area is okay, these people are talking and not really doing anything. So you had a sense of what was going on in your environment. And when you move to bigger spaces, because the standards have changed for what's appropriate for patient care environments, that spreads out the experience. And so a lot of times as clinicians are engaging in that transition from a compressed space to a larger space, even if they're participating in the design process, they don't necessarily appreciate that sixth sense they have and translate that into the future state. So that for design teams and people that are kind of on the periphery helping to inform the future state, you really need to be thoughtful about kind of pushing on those buttons of getting to the sense. There's those sixth senses that really are important for people to appreciate, because it isn't just about how pretty it is. So
I see you nodding. You agree about the sixth sense?
Well, first I was going to say, you have talked about doom, because with my name being Sunny, like that just
Okay.
doesn't go
Yeah.
well. So I think that's probably why they did that. I completely agree. And I think it's learning what the clinicians, what they do in those 12 hours, 8 hours, those long hours. You were talking about the respite, but what is it that they do throughout that day to make it more efficient? When everything is very time sensitive, everything's very time oriented, especially for patients from their perspective. They want their medication on time, those kind of things. So what is it that in that environment helps them to achieve that easily? Looking great is wonderful. I gave an example on the call where just even from a supply perspective, we wanted things covered, looks nice and tidy, but the nurses were pulling them down, everything looked, because they couldn't see in them. So they didn't know where their materials were, or those kind of things. So then it wasn't efficient. And so just looking at those kind of things and where they're constantly doing their work is going to be helpful in that environment.
And you spend a lot of time in lean and process improvement. Certainly, there's a relationship there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have to say too that, and I'm going to speak on the joy of being a nurse or being in the clinical space, is that the majority of us in this profession choose to show up to do our job. We want to be there to take care of patients. We want to, create healing and create, kind of conducive environment where we're compassionate and we're able to elude that. And I think, to the point that have already been brought forward on, just to design, whether it's a new facility that's large to support capacity in communities, or what I used to work in, we used to call the ghetto. It was an ER that had, very tiny spaces, a lot of work to happen, a lot of equipment in play. But the one thing that was wonderful about that is we had a sense of community with each other because we were in such a confined space that we knew where each other were. And when push comes to shove, we were there to help each other. We built out a larger facility, beautiful, wonderful for the aesthetics, but I think it's important too to understand the patient perception, to your point of, sharing a picture of what it may look like. But I think we've touched on, a lot of key points that when you design, having feedback and, clinical member or several members of that clinical team being a part of your design, because it is important to know where products are, where supplies are, where your patients are, so that you have that quick environmental scan. You can look at patients to tell if they're sick or not sick. You need to understand what you're hearing and what you're seeing. But safety is a big issue, and I think having an environment where you're collecting all of these aspects into that and bringing the right people to help with the decision making is important. A lot of time we're only involving maybe the design team or the C-suite, or maybe someone that's kind of the construction operation lead for a hospital or healthcare. And so it's really important to bring those that are going to be doing the work to get feedback and perception, and even a perspective from maybe a community member that has been a patient, or that you can see through that lens, because that's part of the healing.
Michelle,
Yes, please.
This is Michael from the audience. I realize we introduced you, but I would love to actually hear you introduce yourselves. Do you mind going through and just reminding us of your name and your title?
Sure.
Yeah.
Which organization?
Oh, okay. So I'm Ronn Goodnough. I am a program manager with planning, design, and construction for CommonSpirit Health and Virginia Mason Franciscan Health. And my background is as a pediatric nurse practitioner by training, and spent a number of years in pediatric healthcare, oncology, critical care, and and now I get to work in planning and design. So
Thank you.
I am Sunny Porter. I'm the Director of Nursing Operations at St. Anthony Hospital in Gig Harbor. It's part of Virginia Mason Franciscan Health. But I worked also at St. Joe's, where actually the majority of my career has been, for about 15 years, and then St. Anthony's for the last 5.
I'm Tina Seery. I'm a Senior Director of Safety and Quality at the Washington State Hospital Association. We actually support all hospitals in our state, and we also have partnerships with Oregon and historically with states like Alaska and whatnot. I'm clinical by training. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for 28 years. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt. Very passionate about safety and quality. And so I switched gears from being a bedside nurse, moving through hospital administration and leadership roles into safety quality, and just really love this topic. And this is one of the pieces of work that I do. Association.
Very cool. Well, I'm Michelle. Michelle Ossmann. Again, I'm Director of Knowledge and Innovation for Miller Knoll. I'm also a nurse practitioner by training. I'm a neurocritical care. It's my background in Emory University in Atlanta, is where I spent most of my time. And then I got the bug for design when I got to be the client about 20 years ago, and got my PhD in architecture. So I focus on how it is we can demonstrate the built environment matters, right? What research studies do we do to demonstrate that to our clinical colleagues, and they change? It's very cool. All right, move on. So I am super curious to hear, because we were discussing this earlier, some of the situational factors related to the nurse exodus. Certainly COVID, and I would like to move beyond COVID, for heaven's sakes, because we had a nurse exodus before COVID. right? That certainly just made it worse. I know you commented before that it's still very real, however. So I would love to hear how it is we might address what we can control, right? Which might be some of these environmental considerations and processors.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, none of us are surgeons or OR nurses. And so nurses that go to work not expecting to wear a mask for 12 hours, that's a major bummer, right? So, so that's just the reality of where we are. And so to your point, you have to kind of move past that. But I was thinking about it too, nurses go into nursing after they've been nursing students. And as nursing students, they have these experiences in healthcare and those environments that they're going to be working in. And they still finish nursing school and graduate and go on to provide care, but it's at a different level. So there's an intensity once you get your license and you're working. And so you're managing all those emotions and stresses, and having colleagues close by that you can work with to support you is really important. So, but then how that relates to the space, like we've already said, is you need those connections with your team. And a lot of times in our spaces, it's kind of missing, partially because staffing is lower. So you just don't have as many people around you. It's a challenge. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was waiting for your answer.
I don't have an answer yet.
When you find the answer, let me know. I think, we've really tried to work on mentorship. So really mentoring the new nurses with some nurses that have either been around for a while or even within their first year, because they can actually relate to what but from a space perspective, that's a little bit of a challenge. So it's mentoring inside the workplace and outside the workplace.
Oh, interesting.
So trying to get them together outside of work. But then that's also difficult because they've been there 12 hours, 3 to 4 days a week. And so what does that look like? So we've tried to do a lot of work around mentorship because they are limited as nursing students, very limited on what they can and can't do. And then they're kind of thrown into an environment, into the hospital, where it's all hands on deck. Everybody's working really hard, and we want to help set them up for success as much as possible. And that's what we're trying to achieve through the mentorship program. But staffing is a challenge. And when you're mentoring new nurses that have been there for 6 years with a new nurse that just started, it's a little bit challenging for them too. But it's also trying to, with that nurse that's been there for 6 months, they take pride in that. They feel like they've been able to, be successful in the amount of time that they've been there. That's one of the things that we've really been able to see that is successful in the work environment. But it's also creating that environment with the mentorship in terms of aesthetics and those kind of things. It's what they can do together. Because so in a small room, when you're trying to mentor someone, that is a little bit of a challenge.
So it sounds like isolation has been one of the potentially preceding factors that leads to the nurse exodus, if you will, aside from pay, aside from working conditions, the isolation. That's interesting.
Well, I can add, onto that too. I think, the nursing, the staff shortage is, we're hearing a lot about it in healthcare. We anticipate that to be around for several years going forward, but we are, and there are a lot of efforts in play across multiple states at looking at how to enhance and, create, that bridge to support staffing to help our healthcare facilities. But I think where I might focus on a little bit of feedback is, what can we control in the environment? And I think that, we've alluded to the note of, longer shifts. Most of the time, healthcare clinicians and providers are working, 10, 12-hour, 14-hour days. And I think if you look at the environment, what is it that we can control? And I think that is maybe an area that, we want to, focus on, and that is, in healthcare, we talk about the culture of safety, and that can mean a lot of different things to different persons. But really what that is creating an environment where not only is there, just engagement from leadership, engagement from staff, having kind of bi-directional communication. It's creating an environment that is safe and conducive to the amount of time that you're spending there. And again, thinking about the patient's perspective as well. So I think an environment, it's important to understand, appealing to all the senses, being able to create, in a space that might be, you're not able to start from the ground up. But looking at that and just looking at opportunities for visual sightlines, for auditory, for knowing that I'm safe because I can see my colleagues here. And then from the patient's angle, does my caregiver look busy, stressed because they can't find equipment, the computers or the hardware or, distracting views and whatnot. So I think it's really important to, address all of those and what concepts that you can consider and create to help with the workflow and making sure that it is setting us up to be successful when we show up to work, making sure that each room is equipped in the same fashion, if possible, having the items that you need most often readily available, but just creating a flow so that your work can be done as seamlessly as possible. And things happen emergently, and so you run. It gets a little hairy, and so we know that. But in the bigger scheme, just creating a nice cohesive culture where you can engage with patients and each other.
I think also, if you just think about environment kind of along the same lines, they're overstimulating environments. So you've got alarms going off of multiple types. So you've got sound, then you've got, bulletin boards that have way too much stuff on them, because I've got to have that thing right here, but then I need this thing too. Oh, and then I need this thing, and so there's like this visual chaos that gets implemented, and then there's patterns that get brought in, and then there's maybe color or not too much color, not enough color. I mean, there's all those things that you need to think about. And I'm sorry, but there are smells as well. You got to deal with smells. So, I mean, all of your senses are being affected when you're in these spaces. So you need to think about what's important to the clinicians for, sightlines are huge. And it's not just about sightlines for this, seeing the team, it's sightlines for the patient, but it's all together, all those pieces coming together to make it so that your senses, if you can balance the stimuli, if you will, so that nurses and clinicians, frankly, not just nurses, are able to focus on the things that are really important, which is, safety. Safety is huge for the team. So I think in terms of the Institute for Healthcare Improvements, TCAB, which is old, transforming care at the bedside. So safety, team vitality. I always forget the third one. Value, patient-centered care. Why do I forget patient-centered care?
Because it's just obvious, right?
It's obvious. But those pieces, when you start to think about design, those things can help to frame how you're going to create a space. So taking the teams, a lot of times, like we've said too, you don't have a lot of clinicians that are involved in the design process. And there are ways to bring them into that experience a little bit, not necessarily meeting with the design team in the moment, but having influence into that. So helping them to think through what are the priorities. If we're looking at two different options around safety, what takes priority? So then having them do some research on what does safety look like in a nursing environment? Because nurses don't necessarily, they know they want it, but they don't necessarily know what it means.
They have a sixth sense about it.
They have a sixth sense about it, but they don't necessarily know what it means or what it should be. So kind of getting the teams to get engaged around what those factors are, doing research, and then informing the process so that they can help to create spaces that are healthy and can help them do their work. And it's hard for design teams because you do have ideas and you're bringing those ideas in, and nurses, when they're thinking about these things, are really excited. And so they don't necessarily always also think about what they're going to do in this space. They think, oh, how could I use this to do what I'm going to do? But then when you build it, it's kind of like a sidewalk that you have these right angles, and then you notice that that people actually are walking through the grass.
Pig trail, that's what that's called in environmental psychology. Yeah.
So planning and kind of taking your expertise to the clinicians to help them think about what they're going to do and what shortcuts they're going to take is really important, because every shortcut is really important for efficiency, because they want to be safe, they want to be efficient, they want to provide quality care, they want to have, a good working environment, working experience with their team. So if everybody is kind of on that same thing, what shortcuts are we going to take that will help to inform the space in a positive way?
The way you're describing it as shortcut to me sounds like a form of continuous improvement, right? In other words, I am making an adjustment. I am curious though, if you've ever found that the layout or wherever it is that you're working allows itself to adjust so that you can then make that improvement, or does it require, Band-Aids and paper clips and tape?
Well, it kind of depends on what kind of environment you're in.
Sure.
I mean, so state team spaces, for example, a lot of times we're building monuments. So we don't have flexible solutions or making adaptations to the environment. So trying to avoid monuments. So even for nurses stations, because that's changed over time.
Yeah, totally agree.
I think from a safety perspective, I think of medication rooms. And, prior, it used to be kind of a cart, if you will. And now we've really tried to modify as much as possible in terms of safety. Just if it's a red mat, there's just like visual cues that mean certain things that it's not communicating to this individual when they're there. So that's kind of something that we've done, but trying to limit the amount of interruptions as much as possible. And so what that looks like in that environment, and you don't need a whole entire, I don't think, a remodel for that, but just little changes in that area can make the difference. We have, I'll use my own hospital for an example. One of the floors has the medication room right inside the nurses station. So you can imagine the audio, all of the interruptions that they have. We flipped it on one of our floors, one of our newer floors, just to put it right behind a wall. They still have windows. They can see if someone is in there. And that then allowed for them, though, to have less interruptions. Same kind of layout design, same kind of thing, but it's just learning those types of things in that environment that helps decrease those interruptions to make the safety important. Made a huge difference.
Cone of silence.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. Well, so now that we've discussed some of those factors behind the nurse exodus, I'm curious what you think design can offer in terms of attracting, like how it is that we can inspire our nurses to remain in practice rather than preventing them from leaving. Right? It's a slightly different take. I'm curious.
Gosh, I think we've touched on that. Maybe we can elaborate a little bit more of just, we show up to do the work because this is what we want to do. And I think, taking into consideration of just, all of the factors that we've shared, or, just physical layout, what can we do to improve sight of our patients and our team? What can we do to enhance, the materials and the tools or resources that we need that are easy to get to, that are easy to identify. So I think to the point, visual cues, those Kanban,
Yes.
it's very familiar to all of us in healthcare. So, you know where a crash cart is, where the exit is, where the medication room is, the crash cart, those things, but creating a space with those things in consideration. So, maybe it's a lower frequency that you might use something, but it's high stakes. Where are we going to put things? And then creating that ability to find your colleagues, and if you have the ability to see your patients, absolutely ideal. I know we haven't spoken a lot about, kind of like a break room or a place where we go and retreat. And it's true, nurses or other healthcare clinicians often don't take breaks as maybe a traditional 9-to-5 role. But when you do, you want it to be a place that is conducive and, just creating, that relaxation, a place to put your feet up, maybe a place to, have food. But you want to be thoughtful in that sense of just safety and community and, keeping things in an appealing to the senses for all the right reasons.
So then you're finding that respite rooms still are an attractor. It's still a desirable thing to have.
They are. They absolutely are. And, I think it's important to have a place that is dedicated. I mean, a lot of us have gone into office closets with a chair and it's dark and there is no window. If it's possible, what would that look like? If you could ask one of the clinicians, or a few of them, what does taking a break look like to you, and understand that. Some folks like to, watch TV, some like to hear music, some like to be quiet, use their phone, check email, things like that. And some just want to eat. And so, or go outside.
Right.
So, there's a lot of different ways that you can engage them to understand what are those top priorities in a space, or at least make it at least conducive for that.
The healthcare design, just this past week, there was a session focusing on the different kinds of resilience rooms one might have. And in this case, they were trying to have two types, an active and a quiet. So in the active, you could throw things and exercise. And I'm just imagining, right? Like I think I heard about at one point in the pandemic, like plate breaking rooms, right? Where you could, really get physical about it. And then those rooms that were super quiet. And that was the sort of recommendation sort of broadly, because people experience respite in different ways. People who exercise to relieve stress, or people who go to a spa to relieve stress, they're similar but different, right?
Yeah, when I was thinking of what you were saying earlier about, that environment and where I want to work at, I was thinking that would be a place that would bring me joy. So if we were able to achieve all of that, and that would retain, nurses or myself. But I think one of the key things that we can't forget about is also the patients. So if patients are happy and satisfied with their care, it brings nurses joy.
Yes.
So bringing that patient into these conversations, into the design, we have found that our patient family partners that we use in these situations, they have such a different perspective sometimes than the clinicians. What we think is important to a patient from a clinician perspective may not always be. So I think it's really important to really have clinicians to be able to help with that, but also patients, because it is very true. If I have a patient that is happy, I'm more likely to go into that room, to really want to engage in them versus if someone is really angry. And obviously we're trying to work hard to not make them that way. But if we have happy patients, the nurses are going to be happy as well. We will continue to retain them.
That's an interesting turn, right? If you design for an optimal clinician patient experience, what you're getting is a clinical experience that's also positive, right?
Yes.
And so that's a sort of 1-2 punch that I don't think we really hear about in the literature or in the conversation about nurse well-being or respite or joy. It really doesn't talk about the patient. The sort of general argument is we focus so much on the patient, now we're going to focus on the clinician, but you're suggesting that you cannot have one without the other.
You cannot. Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's a very healthy balance, and you need both perspectives.
Well, I think, one of my favorite, just because he's a neat guy, but he's also a good designer, but a guy named Jess Sorrell, and talked about the idea of hosting. And that's a huge piece of the experience for everybody. Because if you think about, as a nurse, you're hosting patients. And so when patients are happy and they have their needs met, then the nurses feel good about that as well. And with current spaces, it can be challenging because there's no room necessarily. But if the patient has a visitor, so they need a space for that visitor to sit or to rest. And so if you don't have that in your experience, which obviously now code requires that you have certain things like that in place, but it can be more intentional and more thoughtful in ways that make it obvious, because it's one of those things that it's one of those sixth senses again, where you don't necessarily know why you appreciate it, but you do appreciate it. And if a patient is in a bed and there's a very clear and obvious location for a family, which is pretty typical these days, but if it's intentional and it's thoughtful, then that gives them that kind of peace of mind. One less stressor, right? One less stressor for them, one less stressor for the nurse. If all there are in the room are red plugs or on the head wall of the room, and there's nothing thoughtful for the family member that needs to charge their phone or their computer or whatever, then that's, I don't know if I can use the red plug or the plug on the head wall. And so then the nurse comes in and looks at the person like, and maybe I didn't look at her with kind of like, what are you doing, in my mind? But what she saw was, oh, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
So maybe I have a headache and I'm just looking at her because my eyes are dry. But what the story she told herself when I looked at her was, oh crap, I plugged my computer into the wrong outlet and I'm
in trouble.
In trouble. So that's a stressor for her. That's a stressor for the patient. That's then that tension, now it's awkward. And so the space can inform even those little interactions. Maybe that seems weird, but I think it's really important to be thinking about how those things can influence, because a lot of it's not something that people are going to be like, oh, I like this space because it does this. It's why do you go to certain areas? You don't necessarily know, you have a feeling about it. Sixth sense. So, and like you said, there's lots of different people experience things in different ways. So, I think about in nursing school, when I was at Prov in Seattle, I would go outside and listen to the traffic on the street. And that was like my quiet place. It was my third space. Right. And then when I was in San Antonio in the Air Force, there was this huge, big lobby space, and I would go sit down there, and it was really quiet, and that was my third space. So different experiences, different times of your work day or your work year or whatever, you're going to have different needs. So offering those opportunities for people to find their third space is really, really important. Because maybe it's just sitting next to Sunny and talking for a while too.
I would love to go down that rabbit hole and hear from each one of you where your third space is or has been over your career. So you mentioned two. I'm curious, Sunny and Tina, where your third spaces have been.
Well, I'd like to say the morgue. Just kidding. No, you guys are thinking I'm crazy now, but that's a little funny.
Yeah. I'm with you. We're with you.
We can handle that. I'm just kidding, though. That is not where I go and spend my quiet time. No, I actually.
It is quiet.
I know.
It is quiet. Cool.
I will say we are very blessed because our environment that has been built at St. Anthony's, we have a healing garden. And we'll often find our team members out there, but that is where I also like to go. We have created a walking path, just kind of a space for that. So we will go often out there. That's where I will go and just kind of enjoy that quiet time. We have created respite rooms for staff as well. And we have had the struggle, honestly, about some people who don't want the quiet and kind of that they feel like for them, it could be doom and gloom, even though it's very quiet and serene. They want something more. So they'll go to the actual gym that we have there just to kind of walk on a treadmill, listen to some music, those kind of things. So that is where my area is the healing garden. I think externally is important as internally. Being able to provide that for visitors, staff, even patients sometimes, and have that type of environment outside is really healing as well.
Yeah, I would say that, it depends on the time and space and what might be going on for your day. And there are times where you need to talk to your colleagues, and you might be in a break room or a space where there's a few other staff. But for me, I would say my general go-to when I was active at the bedside, and I'm an ER nurse by training. And so you can imagine, the things that you may see and just, how a lot of time you compartmentalize, some of those experiences and you get through and you do what you need to do. But I think my biggest, third space would be just getting outdoor. It's a place by myself to recenter, to collect myself and just kind of process through that experience and, just do some reflection. But to me, most important thing is to get out and move and be physical. I think, I don't know if it was nursing that kind of forced some grazing habits with the way I eat. And so sitting down for a 30-minute lunch wasn't important to me, but getting out and walking or, exploring the campus just to, get moving and away from the moment was ideal. And so just having a space, and that might look different in different places. It might look different during different types of weather, but even walking through a parking lot around, at a facility is another way to get moving when it's cold and pouring rain. So it's just having different spaces for the different needs.
Very nice, thank you. Well, I would love to hear how you have tried to garner feedback from colleagues and folks working in the areas to continuously improve these spaces, right? Given what we know about joy, how it is that we can support people in all these different ways, but how to elicit the feedback from the people who are on the front line. There are always these comment boxes and meetings that no one goes to, all those different issues that we struggle with. And so I'm curious how you've managed to create this culture of constantly seeking to improve, to change, to garner feedback, and to create joy where possible.
We often will do something that's a term called Gemba. So we will go to the Gemba, we will go to their workspace, look and see what they're struggling with, and then asking them multiple questions of, what do you think could be improved here? What does this look like? Those kind of things, and really just being in their workspace with them, not necessarily having them come to a meeting or things like that. It's going to their actual space and being able to see it and have them be a part of it.
Super effective, no doubt. It sounds like you completely agree. I know Miss
Yeah.
Lean Black Belt, most certainly.
I think this happened, as I was getting into, kind of this passion around clinical quality improvement, lean and whatnot. I had a little bit of dabbling in it with my organization, and kind of propelled me into seeking that more as focused area of study. But it was the right click for me. And I think it was a great opportunity at the time because the organization I was working with, we were building an additional facility, a Mediplex facility that had different services. It was going to be a standalone emergency room. So that's unique in itself. Urgent care, primary care, ancillary services and whatnot. And meeting the volume of patients that we anticipated in this business pro forma. It was really intriguing and interesting. But my scope was really narrowed into designing an ER that was kind of that on-stage presence for the community. They're coming in with an illness or acute injury or whatnot. And so what kind of experience do we want them to have? We use patient satisfaction scores. That was really important to understand. But we really had a gift of me working, my opportunity to work with the team that was going to be doing the work. And so that was the gift. And it was to talk about, in their current work environment, what do they like? What are barriers? And then designing workflow based on some of those barriers that they described and working with the design team. And we, piloted what that looked like. We looked at, barriers that patients described, and that was, the staff look rushed or hurried, or I can't see them. This is how I look from my laying in a bed and things of that nature. But we really worked on that to design a workflow so that all of the equipment that was necessary was at the bedside in the right order. We made sure that hardware computers, everything was near the patient so that we didn't look like we had our back to a screen. We've worked several environments where your back is to the patient as you're trying to type things in. And the same thing at the desk, but just really creating a space that they were involved in. And it takes ongoing work because what you may think is going to work, you may need to tweak a little bit more. And so it's constantly engaging the group to understand. And it was really, really fun to see everyone so happy. And from that first impression for the patient, it alludes to the entire staff of them feeling like they're listened and they're being cared for, and that gives them the ability to engage patients in a more relaxed way. And I think it was very conducive. Our scores were through the roof in a positive way. And so I think having that ability to engage both patient and the staff, you mentioned that as well, but I think it's really critical.
As you're talking, you're describing the initial design build phase. I'm curious how you bring then new staff that comes in. How do they know what it was built for? I'm curious if you figured out that's an ongoing challenge. And the military certainly struggles with that, where they know that the people who will operate the building are never the people who actually built the building by design, right? It's just the way it is. So having that continuity of, I know what this is for without an in-service for your building every time becomes really complex. So I'm curious about any work that you've done to try to make sure that designs that were very purposeful maintain that purpose and the knowledge of what that purpose was over time.
I can add a little bit about that experience. And what we did too is a lot of cross training with staff. So I may be the nurse and I have these duties, but there may be a time where I need to help get folks in through the lobby. I may be up in the urgent care. I may be at the bedside registering a patient and starting an IV and drawing blood and getting them on a monitor. And so we did a lot of crosswalking of work and roles, not meaning that that would necessarily be their job, but we did a lot of kind of boots on the ground. So it helped not only with team building, but it also helped us understand kind of the different parts of our team that were essential. And so we walked through, what that looks like, and we developed scripting on how to, do this if you needed to be in the role. It may not be your primary, but how do you do this?
I'd be curious to see how they managed COVID. I'm sure better than most because a lot of cross training had to happen, right? I don't know that most systems do that. Super interesting. Anyone else like to share?
I think we've almost done a little bit of the opposite, where something that was purposefully designed in that way no longer kind of functions in that way.
Oh, interesting.
And so now we are asking, okay, so what would work better?
Okay.
Mostly because we've grown out of that space. We no longer can do a direct back in our emergency department. So we literally have no waiting room at all, because that was not the purpose or the function.
Right.
It was designed that way. It worked amazingly well for the first 9 years that we were open. And now we have just really expanded. And so now we're actually asking them, knowing that this was the purpose, how either we can't necessarily function that way anymore, but what can we do to make it a little bit, better, and working with the clinicians on that.
Interesting.
That's kind of my example. It's almost the opposite.
Yeah.
But still.
To say that, it may not be worthwhile necessarily to worry about reminding them what it was supposed to be, but rather this is what our current state is. What are we going to do about it?
We do that though, because they will get frustrated and are asking why
was this
like this? Those kind of things, seeing the environment, and it's explaining that, previously this worked great and this is how this was intended to function. So, and then they actually agree, oh, that would be amazing.
Sure.
So company launches new software. Everybody gets trained to it. Everybody's on the same page. Then 6 months later, as you're hiring people.
Why are you looking at me?
You're an executive. You get all the pressure. 6 months later, that whole rollout that everybody oriented for 3 days to the new software, does that happen for the new guy that just got hired? No. he gets a 2-page document on how to use it, maybe.
Right.
Maybe it just kind of disappears. The director, the manager, the executive, no, the manager that had a really good idea in designing a space and everybody was excited about it because it was this new idea. He quit before it opened.
That's right.
So person was going to train everybody on how to use this new idea, went away. All you guys need to help prevent that. So, and what I mean by that is not every good idea is a good idea, right? And oftentimes the past informs the future. New ideas need to be incremental. They need to be connected to the past so that it's a little bit more thoughtful, so that you're not jumping in a new environment that is like, I don't even know why you would do this way. So it's really important to have that connection to the past. And it's really important. And okay, if I say to you, hey, Michael, I expect you, what's that initial feeling when I say, hey, I expect you to do something?
I got nervous.
Yeah, you got nervous. Should you get nervous when there's an expectation? You shouldn't. It's just a reality. There's expectations, right? When I start to ask you, hey, why did you do that? Why did you put that there? Do you get that same sensation? Like, because I like it there. Like, there's an awkwardness to that. So in the process of designing spaces, when you are inviting teams in, when you are inviting clinicians in, or you're inviting designers in, there's often that like uncomfortable situation where I don't necessarily want to push or test or ask too much. And if you don't, you're going to end up with the environment where I can't now nuance it and make it work because things have adapted. Potentially. I mean, it's not exact science, but that's a really important thing to do. So I think you have to look at the past and you have to find kind of what's working well now, but you also have to remember that it is going to be different. So we are going to be doing things differently over time, incrementally and slowly. There may be some huge jumps, but you have to connect it, and you have to be able to ask, why would you do that? Why do you need to put that there? Why are we doing it this way? Because it forces a conversation, and it forces thoughtfulness and maybe breaking open some things that need to be tweaked more so that it is easier down the road when I'm gone for Sunny to take over and be able to make it work. That's my 2 cents.
And certainly being able to make it work and being successful, as you pointed out, right? Having the environment allow you to be successful is certainly an underpinning to having some joy, right? In that it's not a burden to do your work.
Yeah.
I think if you have executives that want to make all of the decisions, that I would definitely invite you to like push on them to say, what about your clinicians? What about your teams who are working in the spaces? My hope is that you don't encounter that, but if you do, I would definitely try to push on that to ask them about the teams, because I mean, from an executive, I might think that I know, but they're the ones that are doing the work day in and day out, and they're in that space 12, 13, some 16 hours a day. And they are really the people who can provide you the great input on that.
Any thoughts on that? I know we're getting near the end of our time, so I wanted to.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And to the point that was just shared is that we will changes will need to happen. Care will continue to have technology or new ways of providing that care in our environment, and so it should evolve. But when you're thinking about that, what is that, what does that look like if we were to fast forward 10, 15 years? Does the space still meet the, kind of the fundamental elements of safety? And if so, fantastic. And if not, rethink about how that design concept could perhaps be enhanced to support, just technology and evolution of care at the bedside. So
I think that's really important because there are some of those foundational things that aren't going to change
right,
no matter what.
Right, safety.
Yeah.
Being a key one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always try to say safety is what we care about most. And I get the sense that no one really believes me. I'm like, no, really.
a lot happens.
Yeah.
A lot happens
Safety is
in the
really all we
hospital.
care about. Yeah, no, for sure. Well, any closing thoughts? I know we're getting near our time. Want to make sure that we respect everyone's time. Any questions from the audience?
I have a question. So speaking of that, top down and creating things in that environment that might not work so well, what was the most inappropriate or heinous thing that you've seen put in the built environment that you
Great
had to
question.
deal with?
Love it.
Trying to think with you.
I'm sure there's a lot of them.
Charge nurse desk that you have to go around a corner, through a room and out a door to get out from the charge nurse station to be able to support their nurses. It's a really bad idea.
Or you hop over the desk.
Or you hop over.
Yeah,
the
right.
desk. But it was a really deep desk, so it would have been like a Dukes of Hazzard slide.
That's pretty bad.
I think the sight lines, I've gone from, an environment that was built in, the 60s, 70s, where you don't have sight lines to the egress. And, like we talked a lot about safety and not having that is detrimental. But I think kind of commonly, and what you may see in some of these healthcare spaces is just, we've been using computers at the bedside for several years, but a lot of time the back is to the patient, and so you can't see them, and their experience is poor in that sense. And so I think if anything, just even in that room, that would, I don't know if it qualifies as heinous, but it definitely is not, it doesn't seem as positive. The goal was to bring you with the patient so that they can feel like you're, at the bedside doing care while you need to document on the computer versus paper. But it had a different experience.
You had wonderful designers then. No one,
Yeah.
you all are doing a great job.
All good.
No, I mean, I was thinking of, so you might be familiar with St. Joe's. It's obviously the big tower with the circles. Concept was what seemed great, but there's just no space in those, what we called quads. So while I think that having these nurses in the center and kind of in that area, it seemed great, it just did not allow, people are tripping over, linen barrels, supply, trying to bring everything into that quad space, because the intention was to have it outside, but that's a lot of walking back and forth for supplies, for things like that. So we would often start trying to bring things in to the area where the nurses were, the clinicians were, and were working. And it just did not allow for enough space. And then we were tripping over things and things like that. So allowing at least enough space to be able to do that when you still need all those things right there with you and not having to go too far to retrieve them.
Any other questions?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Michael, you first.
I know we are at time. People who are on Zoom, hello, feel free to log off if you want. We appreciate you staying in the room, but your audience here is a lot of interior designers, architects. What's something that you wish that they could hear? What's something you want them to know about the next time they design a space or the next time they're called in to refresh a space? Because they're listening right now.
No carpet.
Oh, yeah.
No carpet, please. Things that are easy to wash with, exactly the chemicals and whatnot that we need to put on them. Ergonomic, cabinetry, or, just space and design in that sense too, of thinking maybe looking at the different environments and how much time a person would be standing at a bedside versus monitoring. There's going to be different roles on different floors. Critical care and ER, you're going to be walking around and at the bedside more. What does that look like in the work in the space, in maybe some observation rooms or subacute beds? Your patient may be in the room a little longer. So what does that look like? And maybe the staff won't be in there as often. So I don't know what would you add.
That is key. I think the fabrics and the cleanable. So bring infection prevention in, maybe into the conversations too, when we're looking at designing when it comes into the interiors and things like that. Lesson learned, obviously for us, is afterwards, then infection prevention said, well, how are you going to clean that? Right. Those kind of things. So it's trying to get those people who might have a different perspective into that conversation early on as well. And I think I'll just add again to not forgetting about the patient. I agree that we do put so much focus on the patient, but there's so much that can be helpful for a patient and the clinician at the same time, and design it that way. That would really be essential.
Having space for all of the items that you need, so that it's aesthetically pleasing, it's organized, that it creates a calm environment, so it promotes healing and just the joy from the caregiver there doing their role that they want to do. And I think being able to have a space for things, and if there isn't enough space, then just kind of rethinking, what that might look like, and engaging the team to understand why they might need more things, because often we do clutter and trip hazards happen, and it just creates it's too busy. So creating a place where there's a bulletin board that needs to happen, where would that be most ideal? So it's not overstimulating, in a healing environment, or the intention of a healing environment.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And what I was trying to say as well is, if a nurse comes in and has to opt in, patient is asking for something, has to leave to go get it, or to do something else, and it's not right there in that environment for that individual, then the patient gets frustrated as well. So that's not necessarily playing into that healing environment either. So as much as we can, again, collaborate with the clinician, patient, provider, those kind of things, and having that in that environment is really helpful.
It's actually a central safety component. Cynthia Doherty, who is sort of classic nursing theorist on surveillance, the whole description is that you're at the bedside. You don't leave, right? So leaving is always a sort of break, if you will, in that safety chain. And we have to leave, of course, but how do we minimize that, bringing people to the bedside?
The amount of interruptions that occur as soon as you leave the bedside.
And you forget why you left to begin with.
Yes.
Yes.
And add was the lighting, and it's probably something you all think about, but maybe we wouldn't think of it, but lighting makes a big difference on how you feel. Excuse me, so having something like this type of lighting over maybe a workstation, where you're really trying to get through your tasks, and then maybe options for patient care areas where you have the chance to have brighter light, or some options for lower light, depending on what you're trying to do in that space.
Well, I would emphasize asking why a lot, and just thinking through all those things, and especially because, like you're saying, nurses need things at the bedside. They need it close because they want to be at the bedside. They need to be at the bedside. Sometimes what happens is they want everything at the bedside. So it's not just asking why, but it's asking, okay, what if you had to pick, if you're on an island and you can only take 3 things, let's do three things, what would you take with you on the island? And those are the sorts of things that you kind of have to crack their thinking a little bit, because, well, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want. And even when it gets to the macro, it's like, well, I want the OR next to the emergency department, but I want the emergency department next to the coffee shop, and then I want the ICU right inside of it. But that's not,
there's no perfect design.
There's no perfect design. So it gets to that kind of broader, but it's also thinking through what are the things that you really have to have? Why do you need to have them? So that you can really tease it out so that they can be efficient, they can feel successful in providing care, and they don't have to leave very often. You know, maybe it's your catheters that are down the hallway because you're not putting in a catheter every 5 minutes. It's good. So it's thinking through all those sorts of things. So kind of pushing on the staff as to why they would want certain things in the space. Because at the end of the day, all the competing priorities, something has to win, and you want the right things to win.
I like that.
Oh, I just wanted to, number one, Michelle, thanks for guiding us today.
Sure.
And then the panelists, your insight, I think everybody would agree here that you guys brought up some really cool, great ideas and some joy and some doom and gloom a little bit, but some joy also, right? So I've booked you guys for like a couple months to go to different places to have this talk. Is that all right? But I also want to say a big thanks, really. So.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.